introducing one gets or services. each other, and also there is a free trade. And ignore transportation cost, excessive specialization, and also countries could not diversify their products or services. What is WTO function? Okay, we will discuss about the administers WTO trade agreements, about the forum for trade negotiations, regarding the handles trade disputes, monitors national trade policies, technical assistance and training for members, and also cooperation with other international organizations. And regarding to the WTA limitation, doesn't have power to enforce regulations and agreements to the countries which breach the regulations. Being members of WTA are voluntarily. Non-members country could not be enforced to join and follow WTO regulations. WTO fund comes from its members. The members that pay more have indirectly more influence to WTO policy than the other members. And for non-members country could still do trade agreement with other countries without WTO assistance. Now we come into the next slide. It's about the Protectionism Act. What are the Protectionism Acts? There are, for point A, tariffs. Tariff is tax to imported goods. The advantage of tariffs is it gives government revenue while quotas and subsidies do not. Usually, tariff is applied for goods or services that is not used as raw materials of domestic industries. Create externality cost, anti-dumping legislation, and the exporting countries also charge tariff to our exporting goods or services, like if US imposes tariffs on Chinese products, Chinese do the same thing to US products. It is a reciprocal principle. And the second one, it's about quotas. What is quotas? Quotas is a limitation of the quantity to imported goods. Quotas apply to protect domestic producer so that the domestic price doesn't fall too far. Quotas are usually applied on goods or services which the country actually could produce by itself, yet it still need import due to the seasonal changes or famines. For example, rice and beef for Indonesia. And for point C, there are subsidies. What are the subsidies means? The subsidies means the government helps domestic industries to achieve economies of scale. Subsidies here is not always in the form of cash. Subsidies could also in the form of machineries, buildings, loans, and others. However, government should be careful with subsidies since they could be accused by doing dumping policy If the purpose is of subsidy to help exporters reduce prices in the exporting market. And the last one, it's about the administrative barriers. It means government applies some regulations to hinder importing goods. Usually, it is a check by customs officer to know if the goods or services have complied with domestic standards and regulations. Okay, we'll talk about the tariffs now. From this graph, we know that P2 is the world price. And due to the tariffs, the tariff inflates to P1, and quantity supplied by domestic producers increase from key S1 to key S2. The demand by local consumers decreased from key D1 to key D2. For the area 2 and 4 are the welfare or the weight lost. Welfare loss means the reduction of production and consumption due to government intervention. For the area 3 is the government's revenues. This is not considered as deadweight loss because the government revenues will be used as expenditure, does not reduce the consumption. And the tariffs have second biggest area of deadweight loss after subsidy. Okay, now turn into the quotas. Look at this graph. For PW is the world price, and the PQ, take a look at the PQ, is the price because of quota policy. And for SD, will shift downward to SDQ, and the new imports quota is Q2 to Q3 I mean. The most difficult part in calculation is to find Q2 and Q3 because the IB question usually doesn't give information about Q2 and Q3. IB will only give information to discrepancies between Q2 and Q3 or the reduction of import quantity without quota Q4 to Q1. And regarding the welfare loss, it is D plus E plus F, which is the biggest amongst all protectionism policy. And for G is the producer surplus area, and A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F is the consumer surplus area before quota. After the quota, A plus B is the consumer surplus area, and G plus C is the producer surplus area. So, if we subtract producer and consumer surplus before and after, it is G plus A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F and minus A plus B minus G plus C equals C plus D plus A plus F. Okay, next slide. It's about subsidies. In this part, domestic supply shifts downward from SD to SDS due to economies of scale. Look at the graph now. And the subsidies could shift a net importer becoming a net exporter. It is because the domestic supplier could overcome domestic demands thanks to the subsidy. This is the graph. Production subsidy is the importing country becomes an exporter. It is a supplementary material. We know from this graph SD as domestic supply. SDS equals domestic supply minus subsidy. And the word price is word supply curve. And for DD is domestic demand. From Q1 until Q2 is imports before subsidy. Q2 until Q3 is exports after subsidy. What is the administrative barriers? Administrative barriers means additional regulations that hinder the process of imports, time lead, warehouse rents at the harbor or airport, and other costs due to importing processing would affect the cost of goods. The government also usually charge retribution for the importers for inspection services. And this is about the comparison of Protectionism Act. Protectionism Act due to the government revenue, the tariff is positive. What about the subsidies? The subsidies is negative or expenditure. And for the welfare loss, the tariff is moderate, the quotas is high, and the subsidies is none or low. And regarding to the reciprocal effects about the tariff, the other countries could impose tariffs on our exporting products. And for quotas, it rarely happens, but the other countries could also imply quotas to our exporting products. And for the subsidies, the other countries could accuse us doing dumping if we give subsidies for importing products which are used as raw materials for exporting products. The other countries would impose tariffs, and WTO allows that if there is any dumping. And what about the products that are usually imposed Protectionism Act? It is products that is not produced domestically but still needed or caused negative externality, such as cars, alcohols, and others. And what about the quotas? About the quotas, products that in normal condition could be provided by domestic producers at affordable prices. Yet, due to famines or seasonal changes, the country needs to import them. Products that the country needs self-reliance in the future, which needs government support. For example, rice, textiles, palm oil industries. These subsidies usually are given to labor-intensive industry with hope they could maintain the labor system and compete with foreign products that use capital intensive. And about the importing license, no need for specific time and important license for the tariff. And what about the quotas? Only appointed importers could do import from appointed countries and only in regulated period of time. And for the subsidies, there is no need for specific time and license. And what about the comparison of Protectionism Act? You can take a look here. Domestic producers, the tariff is better off. What about the quotas? The quotas is better off also. What about the subsidies? The subsidies is better off. And the second one, regarding to the domestic consumers. What about the tariff? The tariff is worse off. The quotas worse off and the subsidies not affected. What about the domestic income distribution? For the tariff, worse off. For the quotas, it's also worse off. There is no subsidies. For the domestic employment, the tariff is increased. The quotas is increased also, and the subsidies is increases. What about the foreign producers? For the foreign producers, the tariff will be worse off. The quota depends. It depends. If the producer lost income due to the quotas, it is worse off. If the producer is in the appointed one, it is better off. And about the subsidies, it's worse off. The last one regarding the quantity. Increase in quantity supplied, decrease in quantity demanded, and import. For the quotas, will increase in quantity supplied and decrease in quantity demanded and import. What about the subsidies? The subsidies increase in quantity supplied, decrease import, but the quantity demanded stays. Why the reasons? The reason why governments still do trade protectionism. What are the reasons? The reasons are qualified arguments, which means certain arguments that the protectionism will give benefit more than the cost to the country. And the second one, it's about the infant industry argument. Infant industry argument will help domestic industries so they could grow and achieve economies of scale in the future. After that, the protectionism measures will be finished and let the countries compete fairly with foreign producers. And the third one is about the strategic trade policies. This is due to plan by the government. For example, the government wants to achieve self-reliance of food. Government will give subsidies to food industries. If government wants to accelerate high-tech industries, government will protect the industries. It will for sure. And the national security. Weapons, steel or uranium, for example, could not be given to market mechanism due to national security. Self-reliance on these products is important to reduce dependencies on other countries' supplies for weapons. Once, Indonesia suffered because of US embargo of four F-16 jet fighter spare parts. For the health, safety, and environmental standard, import goods should be inspected to make sure they have already complied with national standard. Usually, protectionism measures used as administrative barriers. And reasons why governments still do trade protectionism, the other reasons are government revenues. So the tariff could be an additional revenues streams for the government. Overcome current account deficit. Government revenues. Tariff could be an additional revenue streams for the government. And the other reason why governments still do trade protectionism is to overcome current account deficit. So, imports that are excess exports would impact current account deficit. By reducing import and or increasing exports through protectionism measures, one country could reduce the deficit in its current account. The other reason why governments still do trade protectionism is anti-dumping. Protectionism applied because the importing country is suspicious if the exporting countries do dumping policies. The importing country then imposes tariffs to counter the dumping policies. However, in practical, this is only an excuse to impose tariffs. And for domestic wages and job protection, the more imports mean the less domestic producer takes part in the economics. That means domestic wages and jobs will decrease. Okay, that's all for today. We already discussed regarding the international trade, chapter 30. It's about the benefit of trade. We already learned about the comparative and absolute advantage, also about the WTO and protectionism. Goodbye for now. See you in the next video for economics lesson. Bye bye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.